The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Sweetwater, Texas, in 1875. But Darius Xavier didn't even flinch as he continued cutting into his overcooked steak at the corner table of Maggie's dining hall. The other patrons glanced nervously at the doors, but Darius just kept his head down, his worn hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much death to be startled by distant violence. Every night for the past 3 months, it had been the same routine. He'd enter at precisely 7 o'clock, take the same corner table facing the door, order whatever was being served that day, and eat in complete silence. The mysterious cowboy never engaged in conversation beyond what was necessary to place his order, and he never, ever removed his hat during meals. The locals had developed their own theories about him. Some said he was a gunslinger on the run. Others claimed he was a former soldier haunted by the horrors of the Civil War that had ended a decade prior. But all agreed on one thing: Darius Xavier was a man best left alone. Tonight was different, though. As Darius worked through his meal, the doors to the dining hall swung open, and a woman he'd never seen before entered. She was tall, with chestnut hair pulled back in a practical bun, her simple blue dress dusty from travel. What caught his attention wasn't her beauty, though she possessed that in abundance, but the determined set of her jaw as she scanned the room and locked eyes with him. Delilah Newman had been in Sweetwater for less than a day, and already she'd heard about the quiet cowboy who ate alone. Orphaned at 23 and left with nothing but debts from her father's medical care, she'd come west to start anew. Maggie, the proprietress of the dining hall, had reluctantly given her a job as a server after much pleading. "Don't you go bothering Mr. Xavier," Maggie had warned. Man likes his peace. But Delilah saw something in those distant eyes that compelled her forward. Perhaps it was because loneliness recognized loneliness. She approached his table with a plate of apple pie that hadn't been ordered. "You look like you could use something sweet," she said, placing the plate across from him and sitting down uninvited. Darius stared at her, his fork paused midway to his mouth. No one had sat at his table in months. "I didn't order dessert," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I know," Delilah replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But sometimes what we need isn't what we order." She waited there, across from him, as if expecting him to share the pie with her. The entire dining hall had gone silent, watching the scene unfold with bated breath. "I eat alone," Darius finally said. "Everyone eats alone until they don't," Delilah countered. She pushed the plate toward the center of the table. "I'll wait," and wait she did. Every night for a week, Delilah would finish her shift, prepare a plate of something, sometimes pie, sometimes biscuits, once even just a cup of coffee, and sit across from Darius. She would place the offering between them and wait in silence. Each night, he would finish his meal, leave payment on the table, and walk out without touching whatever she'd brought. On the 8th night, a terrible storm rolled in, bringing with it a group of rough-looking cattle drivers seeking shelter. They were loud, drunk, and immediately took notice of Delilah as she served other tables. "Well, ain't you a pretty little thing?" one said, grabbing her wrist as she passed. "Why don't you come sit with us instead of that mute in the corner?" Delilah tried to pull away. "I need to finish my work, sir." The man's grip tightened. "Work can wait. We can't." What happened next occurred so quickly that many patrons later disagreed on the exact sequence of events. Darius was suddenly standing, his chair toppled backward. The cattle driver was on the floor, blood streaming from his nose, and Darius's knuckles were split open. "The lady said no," Darius said, his voice deadly quiet. The other cattle drivers rose, hands hovering near their guns. Darius didn't reach for his weapon. He simply stood there, his eyes cold and calculating. "You best apologize to the lady," Darius continued, addressing the man on the floor. "Then you and your friends are going to finish your meals in silence, pay your bills, and leave." To everyone's surprise, the cattle drivers did exactly that. The tension in the room slowly dissipated as they ate quickly and departed, leaving Darius once again at his corner table, now with freshly bloodied knuckles. That night, when Delilah placed a plate of cornbread across from him and sat down, Darius didn't protest. And when she tore off a piece for herself and pushed the rest toward him, he actually took a piece. "Thank you," Delilah said softly. Darius merely nodded, but something had shifted. A wall had cracked, if only slightly. The next evening, Darius arrived at his usual time, but found his table occupied by an elderly couple. He stood awkwardly in the doorway until Delilah spotted him and waved him over to a different table, one by the window, instead of in the corner. "Your usual spot's taken," she explained as she guided him to the new location. "But this one has a nice view of the sunset." Darius tensed visibly at having his back to the door, but he sat down nonetheless. Throughout his meal, he kept glancing over his shoulder, his discomfort evident. When Delilah joined him after her shift with 2 slices of peach pie, she noticed his unease immediately. "You don't like sitting with your back to the entrance," she observed. He looked at her with surprise. "No, I don't." "Why?" she asked, sliding a fork toward him. Darius remained silent for so long that Delilah thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "You survive longer when you can see trouble coming." "And have you seen a lot of trouble, Mr. Xavier?" "Enough for 2 lifetimes," he replied. Then, surprising her, he took a bite of the pie. "This is good. Maggie taught me how to make it yesterday," Delilah admitted. "I've never baked before." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're a quick learner, then." That brief exchange opened a door. The next night, Darius arrived to find Delilah had reserved his corner table with a small reserved sign she'd made herself. When she sat with him later, he actually asked her a question. "What brought you to Sweetwater?" Over the next few weeks, their nightly ritual evolved. Delilah would work her shift, then join Darius with a plate of food for herself. They would eat together, their conversations growing gradually longer. She learned he was 32, had fought for the Union in the war, and had been drifting westward ever since. He discovered she was 24, had nursed her father through consumption until his death, and had come west because the advertisement for kitchen help in Sweetwater was the only one she could afford to respond to. One evening in late October, Darius arrived to find the dining hall unusually crowded. A group of travelers had stopped in town, and every table was occupied. Delilah spotted him in the doorway and hurried over. "I'm so sorry," she said. "We're completely full." Darius nodded, already turning to leave when she caught his arm. "But I was thinking, it's a nice evening. We could take our supper outside. I have a small table behind the kitchen." "It's not much, but that would be fine," Darius interrupted, surprising her. The table turned out to be a wooden crate covered with a checkered cloth, set up in the small yard behind the dining hall. Delilah had placed 2 crates as seats and set out a simple meal of stew, bread, and a single candle for light. "It's not much," she apologized as they sat. "It's perfect," Darius replied, and for the first time she saw him remove his hat before eating. His hair was dark brown with strands of premature gray at the temples, and a long scar ran along his hairline on the left side. Noticing her gaze, he self-consciously ran a hand through his hair. "Antietam," he explained briefly. "Got separated from my unit and ran into 3 Confederate soldiers. And yet you survived," Delilah noted. Darius's expression darkened. "Not all survival feels like victory." They ate in silence for a while before Delilah spoke again. "My father was in the war too. He fought for the Union at Gettysburg. The wounds healed, but the cough from the winter camps never left him. That's what eventually took him." "I'm sorry," Darius said, and she could tell he meant it. "Is that why you travel, to outrun the memories?" Darius considered her question, looking up at the stars now appearing in the darkening sky. "Maybe at first. Now I'm not sure what I'm looking for." "Perhaps you've been looking so long you wouldn't recognize it if you found it," Delilah suggested softly. Their eyes met across the candle's flame, and something unspoken passed between them. For the first time since arriving in Sweetwater, Darius felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the food or the weather. As autumn progressed into winter, the dining hall became a cozy refuge from the increasingly cold nights. Darius and Delilah's nightly meals together became a fixture that the townspeople now took for granted. Some even began to place bets on when the quiet cowboy would finally court the determined server properly. The first snow of the season fell in early December, and Darius arrived at the dining hall to find Delilah waiting for him with excitement shimmering in her eyes. "Have you seen it?" she asked, taking his coat as he entered. The snow, it's beautiful, Darius nodded, brushing a few flakes from his shoulders. Makes for difficult travel. Are you planning to travel? Delilah asked, her smile faltering slightly. The question caught him off guard. He had always moved on when winter settled in, seeking warmer climates. It was a pattern he'd followed for years. But now, looking at Delilah's expectant face, he realized he hadn't given any thought to leaving Sweetwater. Not immediately, he said carefully. Her smile returned, brighter than before. Good, because Maggie's planning a Christmas supper for everyone who works here, and it wouldn't be the same without you. I don't work here, Darius pointed out. Delilah laughed. You're here more often than some who do. Besides, Maggie specifically mentioned you. That night, their conversation flowed more easily than ever before. Darius found himself telling Delilah about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about his parents who had died of fever when he was 18, about enlisting in the army because he had nowhere else to go. After the war, I couldn't settle anywhere, he admitted. Every time I started to feel comfortable, I'd get restless, like I was waiting for something bad to happen. And now, Delilah asked, her voice gentle. Darius looked at her thoughtfully. Now I'm not sure restless is the right word anymore. 2 nights later, Darius didn't come to the dining hall. Delilah waited, keeping his table reserved long after his usual arrival time, but he never appeared. The next night was the same, and worry began to gnaw at her. On the 3rd night, she was close to panic when the town's doctor entered the dining hall. Miss Newman, he called, spotting her immediately. I believe you've been asking after Mr. Xavier. Delilah rushed to him. Is he all right? What's happened? He's taken ill with a fever. Nothing life-threatening, the doctor hastened to add when he saw her face pale. But he's been asking for you in his delirium. I thought perhaps you might visit. Sometimes a familiar face helps in recovery. Without hesitation, Delilah removed her apron and turned to Maggie. Can you spare me? The older woman shooed her away. Go. We're not busy tonight. Darius was staying in a small room above the livery stable. The doctor led Delilah up a narrow staircase to a sparse room containing little more than a bed, a chair, and a trunk presumably holding Darius's possessions. The man himself lay on the bed, his face flushed with fever, his hair damp with sweat. He seemed thinner somehow, more vulnerable without his usual hat and coat. He's been fighting this for days, the doctor explained. Stubborn man wouldn't come see me until he collapsed at the general store this morning. Delilah sat in the chair beside the bed and took Darius's hand. His eyes fluttered open at her touch, confusion evident in his gaze. Delilah, he murmured, his voice raspy, you shouldn't be here. Hush, she said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. Of course I should. Where else would I be when you're ill? The doctor left a list of instructions with Delilah for administering medicine and managing the fever, then departed, promising to return in the morning. Delilah spent the night bathing Darius's forehead with cool water, helping him sip broth when he was lucid enough, and simply holding his hand when he wasn't. In his fever dreams, Darius called out names she didn't recognize, comrades from the war, she suspected. Once he seemed to be back on a battlefield, trying to pull someone to safety. Another time he called for his mother. But most often he called for Delilah, even when she was right beside him. Toward dawn, his fever broke. He woke to find Delilah asleep in the chair, her head resting on the edge of his bed, her hand still loosely holding his. The sight stirred something deep within him, a longing he'd suppressed for years. Carefully, so as not to wake her, he brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch caused her to stir, her eyes opening slowly. You're awake, she said, sitting up and immediately pressing a hand to his forehead. And your fever's broken, thank goodness. You stayed all night, Darius observed, his voice still weak. Of course I did. Why? The question hung between them, simple yet laden with meaning. Delilah looked at him with an expression that made his heart quicken. Because you would have done the same for me, she said finally. Because you matter to me, Darius. It was the first time she had used his given name rather than Mr. Xavier, and the intimacy of it wasn't lost on either of them. I don't deserve your kindness, he said quietly. That's not for you to decide, Delilah replied firmly. And if you think I spent months sitting across from you every night out of mere kindness, then you haven't been paying attention, Before he could respond, she stood up. "You need to rest. I'll bring you some proper food later." And with that, she was gone, leaving Darius with thoughts more tumultuous than any fever dream. It took another week before Darius was strong enough to return to the dining hall. When he entered, the regular patrons greeted him with nods and smiles. Delilah, who had visited him daily during his recovery, beamed at the sight of him and hurried to his table. "Welcome back," she said warmly. "Your usual?" Darius nodded, but as she turned to go, he reached out and caught her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." The touch of his hand on hers sent a flutter through Delilah's chest. "You're welcome, but don't ever scare me like that again." That night, their conversation took a new turn when Darius asked about Delilah's plans for the future. "I don't know," she admitted. "I came here because I needed work, but I've grown fond of Sweetwater, of the people here." She glanced up at him meaningfully. "What about you? Will you stay through winter?" Darius considered the question. "I've been thinking about that." "There's a small parcel of land for sale on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, but it has good water access and enough space for a modest house and some livestock." Delilah's heart skipped a beat. "You're thinking of settling here?" "Maybe," he said cautiously, "if I had a reason to stay." Their eyes met, and Delilah felt as though she couldn't breathe. "And do you have a reason?" Darius took a deep breath. "I believe I do." 2 days before Christmas, a heavy snowfall blanketed Sweetwater. The dining hall was festooned with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and Maggie had splurged on real candles for all the tables. The Christmas supper she had planned was in full swing, with most of the town gathered to share in the celebration. Darius arrived wearing a new shirt and with his hair neatly trimmed. He'd even shaved his usual stubble, revealing a strong jawline that drew appreciative glances from several women in the room. But his eyes sought only Delilah. She was helping serve the meal, her cheeks flushed from the kitchen's heat, her hair adorned with a small sprig of holly. When she spotted Darius, she hurried over. "You look different," she said, taking in his appearance. "Good different or bad different?" He asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Definitely good," she assured him with a smile. "Very good." The evening progressed with music, food, and stories shared around the tables. Darius found himself drawn into conversations with townspeople he'd barely acknowledged before. He learned that the blacksmith had fought at Antietam too, though on the Confederate side. Instead of animosity, they found common ground in their shared experiences. As the night wore on, Delilah finally took a break from serving and sat beside Darius. Under the table, his hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I have something to show you," he said quietly. "Can you get away for a bit?" Delilah glanced at Maggie, who caught her eye and nodded with a knowing smile. "I believe I can." Darius helped her into her coat and led her outside. The snow had stopped falling, and the full moon cast a silvery glow over the pristine white landscape. He had a horse waiting, saddled and ready. "Where are we going?" Delilah asked as he helped her up. "Not far," he promised, mounting behind her and wrapping an arm securely around her waist. They rode in comfortable silence for about 20 minutes, leaving the town behind and following a path through a small wooded area. When they emerged, Delilah gasped. Before them stood a modest cabin, light glowing warmly through its windows, smoke curling from the chimney. It was situated on a gentle slope overlooking a frozen stream, with the vast Texas sky spread out above it like a blanket of stars. "Is this?" Delilah began, unable to finish the question. "The parcel I mentioned," Darius confirmed, helping her down from the horse. "I bought it last week. The cabin was already here, though it needed some repairs. I've been working on it whenever I could." He led her to the door, suddenly seeming uncertain. "It's not much yet. Just the main room and a small bedroom. But there's room to expand, and the land is good for farming or raising horses." Delilah stepped inside and looked around in wonder. The cabin was simply furnished but cozy, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, and a few shelves holding books and supplies. A handmade quilt brightened the single bed visible through a doorway. "It's wonderful," she breathed, turning to face him. "But why show me tonight?" Darius took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Because I wanted you to see it before I asked you a question." He took her hands in his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Delilah, before you came along, I was just passing through life. Never staying anywhere, never connecting with anyone. You changed that. You sat across from me and waited night after night until I finally understood what I'd been looking for all along." Tears welled in Delilah's eyes as Darius continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I love you, Delilah Newman. I love your patience, your kindness, your determination. I love how you saw something in me worth waiting for when everyone else was content to leave me be. And I'm asking, hoping, that you might consider sharing this cabin, this land, this life with me." Delilah's tears spilled over, but her smile was radiant. "Are you proposing to me, Darius Xavier?" He nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "Then my answer is yes," she said, stepping closer to him. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will share this life with you. I've been waiting across the table from you all these months, hoping you would eventually see what I saw from the beginning, that we belong together." Darius pulled her into his arms, his heart fuller than he'd ever thought possible. When their lips met, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. They were married on New Year's Day, 1876, in the town church with most of Sweetwater in attendance. Maggie cried throughout the ceremony and threw the largest reception the town had ever seen at her dining hall. Spring brought new life to their little homestead. Darius planted a vegetable garden while Delilah set about turning the cabin into a home. They acquired 2 horses, 3 chickens, and a mongrel dog that showed up one day and refused to leave. By summer, they had added a porch to the cabin where they would sit together in the evenings, watching the sunset. Delilah would often bring out 2 plates of whatever she had cooked for supper, placing one before Darius and one across from him, a ritual that always made him smile. "Remember when you used to eat alone?" she would tease, taking her seat across from him. "Seems like another lifetime," he would reply, reaching for her hand. And on clear nights, with the stars spread out above them and the promise of tomorrow before them, Darius Xavier, no longer the quiet cowboy who ate alone, would thank whatever fate or providence had brought this woman to his table, to place a plate across from him and wait.